fundamental unity, and this political malaise at home is leaking right over here. I was with a crown prince who runs his country out here. His father has deferred most of the day-to-day running to him. And he was beside himself saying, you know, you guys are supposed to be a superpower. You don't act like it. We have no idea what you want today. And part of the challenge is, ladies and gentlemen, I had 19-year-old lance corporals who were more articulate about the nobility of what we were fighting for out there than many of the alleged spokesmen in Washington, D.C. And rest assured, this is heavily a war of ideas. And those ideas you and I grew up with, and we take them, as some of the speakers have said, Mark said, we take them sometimes for granted, these freedoms. But we were born free by accident, most of us here in this country. I was born in Pullman. I lived here, we all live here by choice. So we're born free, you know, by accident. We live free by choice, but we have an obligation to turn over to this younger generation the same freedoms we enjoyed. And right now, when you look at America, it seems to be unable to take its own side on occasion in a fight. And I think that if you look at the greatest generation, the generation that came home from World War II, they looked around and said 60, 70 million, nobody can even count the number of dead and the amount of suffering in that war. But they said, it's a pretty crummy world, we have to do something about it. And what they did with it, with that world, was they created the UN, a place where they can talk over problems. I mean, before the UN, there was nothing, basically. League of Nations had failed. They created the Marshall Plan. They said that vindictive treaty that contributed to starting World War II, after World War I, the Versailles Treaty, didn't make World War II, but it certainly contributed. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to help our enemies. Think about that. We're going to help our enemies, and a couple years after we've been killing each other in the Pacific and in Europe, Americans take money out of their pockets and start their economies, and guess where our biggest trading partners are now? So they had that sort of maturity, that sort of compassion, that sort of strategic foresight. They also created NATO. They recognized that they weren't going to stand there and watch the Soviet Union put us right back in the same position. And they banded together, and those people who believed in the values that grew out of the Enlightenment, that grew out of the Reformation, that got voice in our Constitution, that we were going to defend them, and we did it in a way that, generally speaking, we can say there was no major war that brought down the Soviet Union. We contained them until the internal frictions took the Soviet Union down. And that was what they were doing. They created Bretton Woods. You know what is the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. Help people, loan money to people who then pay it back, but they get the starter capital they need to create wealth and lift people out of poverty. That international order worked, and today it's like in Washington, D.C., there is no governing going on, there's no real bipartisan engagement, and that international system, so to speak, that we put together at such cost, we are assuming that it's self-sustaining. It's not self-sustaining. We're going to have to do something, because they knew that no nation is an island. Coming home from World War II and what they had been through, they were committed that we, the younger generation, would not grow up in this acting like we don't have to pay attention to the rest of the world. And that is a lesson that I worry about, because today we have a strategic atrophy in Washington, D.C. We're in a strategy-free zone. I cannot tell you that we have an integrated